Good morning, everyone. Welcome on this rainy Monday morning. My name is Councillor Cheryl Carlisle and I'm the Chair of the Finance and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting, which is a multi-location meeting. The meeting will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and a recording will be available through the Council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members that translation facilities are available and for those attending remotely to choose your language of choice. For those wishing to speak in the chamber, please raise your hand. For those attending remotely, please use the raised hand function. We will alternate between speakers in the chamber and remote attendees. For those attending remotely, please note that those in the chamber will be unable to use the chat facility. Committee members who are attending remotely are required to leave their camera on throughout the debate and when voting in order to maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. If you do need to leave the meeting temporarily, please pop a message in the chat function so the Democratic Services Officer is aware and then let us know when you return. Can I stress that I expect everyone present and participating in this meeting to conduct themselves appropriately and be respectful to each other. That applies to members, officers and anyone in the public gallery. When I open up the debate to members, I will ask committee members to speak and put the questions first, followed by non-committee members. It would be helpful if members could ask all their questions in one go. Whilst I do not wish to stifle debate, can I remind members any questions should be focused on the subject matter and to avoid repetition. If I feel the length of individual speeches are negatively impacting on the overall time for discussion and becoming unmanageable, I will defer to the committee's rules of procedure, which limits the length of speeches to 5 minutes. Moving on to the agenda, it's a shorter agenda this morning as one report has been withdrawn. So we'll start with item 1, apologies for absence, please, Sally.
Yeah, just one apology from Councillor Jeff Stewart.
Lovely, thank you very much. Anybody else got? No. Okay. Item 2, declarations of interest. No. Okay. Item 3, urgent matters. I'm not aware of any urgent matters. And item 4, questions to cabinet members. Also, none of those. Item 5, we're going to review the forward work programme, and Dawn Hughes, our scrutiny and committee services officer, will present the forward work plan. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. I don't actually have any updates for you. There's been no updates since it was last presented 2 weeks ago.
Okay. No comments. So, Councillor Anne's got a hand up online. Councillor
Yep.
Anne, if you just wait for us to get our headphones on, we're still having problems with the sound system in the chamber. Okay, Councillor
Okay.
Anne.
Thanks very much, yeah. And thanks, Dawn. Just a couple of questions about page 9 and 10. There's some significant items on the forward work plan, and yet still they remain without a date. I'm thinking on page 9, we've got the Financial Resilience Action Plan, which also includes our transformation ideas and actions. Then secondly, there's the Asset Management Plan, and I don't think this group has met since 2019, if my memory serves me right. Thirdly, there's the Waste Transfer Station project. Again, no date for that. And then over the page on 10, page 10, equal pay audit. Again, there's no date for that. So given that this is our plan, can we have an update, please?
Thanks, Councillor Anne. What I'll do, I'll raise this at our chairs and vice chairs and we'll get some dates, see if I can ascertain some dates.
Thanks, Dawn. But can I just point out that on the asset management plan, I think I've been asking, I don't know, is it about 6 months about action, the asset management plan? And obviously I'm aware that you've been in discussions with SIPFA for quite some considerable time. So I don't understand why there's no date here, nor indeed why there's been no date by the asset management task and finish group. And we're disposing of assets, and yet the asset management task and finish group has not got a voice, it would appear. Thanks, Dawn.
Thanks, Councillor Anne. Councillor Charlie, do you want to? We've got an update on the asset management plan.
I don't have an update, but I'm happy to seek one and give it up, pass it on to Councillor Anne. Obviously, Dawn will be talking to the chairs and vice chairs.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we'll deal with that at this afternoon's meeting, Councillor Anne.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Charlie.
2 o'clock today. So thank you. Anyone else? Any other? No. Okay. Could I then have a proposer and a seconder to agree the forward work plan? So Gareth, Councillor Chris, thank you. Would everyone like to show in favour? Thank you. And online. Anybody against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, members. We now move on to item 9A, local government budget 25-26, pages 38 to 49. Councillor Charlie's going to introduce the item and Gareth Evans, Finance Manager, is going to present the report. Councillor Charlie.
Diolch Cadera the Adnoddau, pawb. Yeah, so the report's on pages 38 to 49. As always, it's a really detailed report by Amanda Hughes, our Strategic Director for Finance and Resources, who is on a well-deserved break. So Gareth, as Head of Finance, will be going through the detail of the report. So as noted in 1.1, we have a legal duty to sell a balanced budget every year. As I've repeatedly said, that's a complex procedure because it's partly an estimate of need and demand and partly a lot of factors which are outside our control. You'll note in 1.3 we've seen a worsening in our shortfall situation, which is now estimated at 31.2 million. Many of those changes were due to some announcements in the recent budget, as detailed in 1.4. So we'll be going through that in a bit more detail. But if I can take a chair to page 43, Appendix 1. Okay. So you'll note in 1.2, essentially we will get an announcement of our provisional local government settlement on the 11th of December. The actual final settlement doesn't come through until about February. I would note that most years, though, it rarely changes significantly between that period. Last year, it went from 2% to 2.29%. But usually, we know where we stand as on the 11th of December. 1.5, our aggregate external funding is the money we get from Welsh Government. It makes up 71.7% of our actual budget. So obviously that's hugely significant in rising to meet the challenges that we face moving forward. So that will clearly be a really key date for us. I'll let Gareth, as I say, go through the actual detail of the report, but I would like to note one really significant change, which is detailed in 5.4. So within the last budget statement, the Chancellor announced changes to the rates of national insurance, mostly an increase from 13.8% to 15%. We also need to note that actually the thresholds where that's paid has been reduced from £9,100 to £5,000. So for somebody on £9,100, that means there's an additional £4,100, which is subject to national insurance. That equates to about £615 per annum. So taken together, we estimate that will affect our budget to the tune of about 4.6 million. The government announced that public bodies will be reimbursed from that, but as yet, unfortunately, we still have no actual detail about how that reimbursement will take place. Will it actually cover the cost? How will it be allocated? And obviously then there's the real concern about the private sector and the third sector we use to deliver our services. So again, last year we delivered around 480,000 hours of domiciliary care, but we rely on a lot of outside agencies, and clearly there'll be additional costs for them. Legally, obviously, we don't have to pay all that, but clearly we have to pay for the cost of care and make sure that our residents are well looked after. So we don't have detail on that, which is really key for me, because we quite often have heard in the past that things have been fully funded, when the reality with an hypothecated budget is you have to take that money from elsewhere. So we're at that awkward stage of the year where we know the size of the challenge ahead of us. We know the consequences of not setting a legal budget. But until we actually get some real numbers on the 11th, 12th, we're a little bit in limbo, Chair. But I'll hand over to Gareth to go through the actual detail, and he'll outline the other pressures that encompass that figure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Yeah, that's an extremely worrying one, the domiciliary care. It's causing an awful lot of concerns within the sector. Thank you very much. Thanks, Gareth. Thank you for standing in for Amanda this morning.
Okay, diolch, Chair. Adnoddau pawb. So as Councillor Charlie's alluded to there, this report is the first in a series of the budget reports that will be presented to democracy, setting out the current information relating to the ongoing budgetary process and then the forthcoming process as we work towards setting a balanced budget for 25-26 in February 2025. As Councillor Charlie's referenced, the current position following the autumn statement is an estimated budget gap of 31.2 million. I guess the key point there is that is before any increase in Welsh Government funding. So this report in many ways is limited to an extent until we have that information. I think before the autumn statement, we were working on a basis that we weren't going to get anything, so we had that clarity almost and that certainty. And obviously, with the additional costs that Councillor Charlie has alluded to, particularly around NI, that landscape has changed somewhat since there. So we are there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's, I guess, probably the situation we're in. Almost feels like a little bit of limbo since in between that announcement and the announcement that we'll get to hear next week from Welsh Government. I guess in terms of next week, to what extent any announcement includes details of the reimbursement for additional employers' NI costs for ourselves, never mind any external providers, will remain to be seen, really, I think. So we'll see what's in that when we get that detail. At the moment, we just don't know. As Councillor Charlie alluded to, he did such a good job. He's covered half the stuff I'm going to cover, actually. We'll learn the final settlement on the 25th of February. And again, the expectation is that, as in previous years, that there might be some very minor changes between the draft and the final, but it's not anticipated to be anything that would be anywhere near significant. So again, in terms of the background, I do appreciate members will have heard this probably on a number of occasions now, and we'll almost be able to recite it as much as we can as officers, but I think it is important to go through a lot of the key points that are in the report. So obviously we continue to be affected by high service demand in certain areas, and also economic conditions which continue to bring around a range of pressures, as well as the uncertainty that is prevalent. It's not a Conway specific issue, this, it's across the whole of the local government sector in the UK. And as we've seen and we've discussed before, there's a number of councils across England, not yet Wales, where a Section 114 notice has been declared, which is essentially declaring that the council is unable to set a legally balanced budget and is in effect bankrupt. Whilst a number of the high-profile cases so far have had poor financial management at their heart, potentially reckless decision-making even, it is becoming increasingly evident that other well-run councils are now facing significant issues as a result of a lack of funding and demand being directed to local government, and this is a risk that Conway also faces. The report provides the financial outlook for 25-26 so that members fully understand the significant challenges that we face and can consider the financial direction needed for the remainder of the budgetary process. Just in terms of the settlement, as I mentioned, prior to the autumn statement, the outlook in terms of the information we were receiving from Wales Fiscal Analysis, from the budget plans of Welsh Government and the UK Government, was very poor in terms of local government in Wales, and we were looking at potentially even a cash reduction on what we'd received last year. We now obviously know that Welsh Government will receive an additional 1.7 billion for public services, but again, we don't know how that's going to be distributed across the various different areas, health, local government, and so on. And we'll know more about how that impacts Conway specifically on the 11th of December. So as we have yet to receive that draft settlement, this report assumes no increase, but instead what we're focusing on is our understanding of the financial pressures that we face. So at the time that Amanda was writing the report and following the mid-year revenue monitoring report, we were currently forecasting that for 24-25, our budget will be overspent by 5.5 million. That overspend, or projected overspend, I should say, is predominantly as a result of service demand. Corrective action, as was reported to Frost a couple of weeks ago, is being undertaken to seek to bring that net position back within budget. But it is highly likely that our reserves will be further eroded to some extent. Also, it should be noted that most of these pressures are ongoing into 25-26. In terms of any resource shortfall, that can only really be addressed by a combination of either making budget reductions or service cuts, efficiencies, or raising additional income, and then increasing the council tax and applying non-recurring funding, which is the use of reserves and balances. And as we've said on many occasions in this chamber, the council here has one of the lowest level of reserves and balances in Wales. And again, as I just mentioned, are likely to be eroded further with some of the pressures in year. So the use of balances should not and cannot be seen as an easy fix to avoid difficult decisions about service prioritisation or council tax increases. Reserves must never be used to fund recurring budget activity, and once gone, the funding shortfall remains and the council's financial standing is eroded and resilience further weakened. So as a result, the Chief Financial Officer, which Conway is the Strategic Director of Finance and Resources, or the Section 151 Officer, would again impel members to think very carefully about the use of reserves and balances in 2025-26 to balance the budget and to look for other means to address the budget gap. Furthermore to that, really, the Council needs to address its reserves position and should be seeking to rebuild its balances by allocating a budget to do this. In the event that the settlement is better than anticipated, then rebuilding reserves must be seen as a priority to ensure that the Council retains some resilience in dealing with unforeseen events. In October 24, Cabinet approved the business planning framework, and when adopting the business planning framework, members were made aware that the estimated resource shortfall at that point was 22.7 million. At that stage, an estimate had been made about the scale of service pressures prior to the submission of business cases and changes in employers' national insurance, which have now been built in. Also, there is still a lack of clarity on the funding stream for the teachers' pension increase in 2024-25, which is funded by grant. We're not at this stage aware of whether that's going to be built into any settlement for 25-26. So allowing for those additional pressures, Table 1 sets out the 31.233 million shortfall. I'm not proposing to go through that in any detail, but if there are any questions on that, we can take that at the end if that's okay. Just quickly moving on to the revenue business cases and other pressures. So the business cases that have been submitted by services amount to around 14.4 million. At this stage, those business cases are still subject to detailed review and confirmation of the financial estimates, and consequently the final details will be included in the next report on the budget in early January. In addition to that, the Council also faces other pressures, many of which are based on a range of accounting estimates, particularly relevant in relation to pay. Paragraph 5.3 talks around those pay pressures that amount to 15.2 million. And just very briefly, I'll go through those. They're made up of, members will recall, an additional 0.5% for the September 24 Teachers' Pay Award. We'd budgeted 5%, but the pay deal was settled at 5.5%. We're yet to receive any additional funding to cover that gap, although the indications are that we will receive some funding. There's an estimate included for the September 25 Teachers' Pay Award, which has been put in at the moment at 4%. And similarly, a similar pay award increase for the other pay groups in terms of NJC staff. And then there's the cost of the teachers' pension increase, which I just mentioned has been funded by grant in 2024-25, but we have no information in terms of how that's going to be funded for 25-26. And then obviously there's the estimated cost of the changes to the national insurance liability for employers from the 1st of April 25, which again, Councillor Charlie went through paragraph 5.4, so I don't propose to go through that now, but I guess the headline there is that in terms of our direct costs as an employer, we're looking at around about 4.6 million estimated additional cost. 5.5 touches on two specific areas which aren't included at the moment but need to be given consideration as we go through the process over the next couple of months. And one of those is the impact of the capital budget on the revenue budget, so in terms of any additional borrowing costs that may be incurred. And obviously there's a comment in there around it being prudent to allow for those costs now rather than put undue pressure on future budgets, and we should be seeking to do that if we're able to. And again, as I touched on previously, should we be in a position where we can we should really be looking to start to allocate some additional revenue budget to one side to build up our reserves and build up that resilience. Moving on to section 6 of the appendix, addressing the shortfall. You know, at this stage, as I said, we don't know what additional funding we're going to receive. There are soundings that it will be more favourable, certainly than we'd been expecting prior to the autumn statement, and given the pressures that have come as a result of that, you'd expect that to be the case. But it's critical that we understand what the remaining shortfall that we might be facing is, and this report doesn't seek to discuss the options to address the shortfall other than in the general terms that I'm talking about at the moment. The next report in January 25 will do that, and I think it'll be much more meaningful for members in terms of having that discussion and that debate when we're armed with the full picture. And once we do know that position, there's just two ways to address the shortfall, and that's reduce expenditure or increase the forecast resources. So in terms of expenditure and reducing expenditure, so that's essentially reducing demand from any new business cases or implementing budget reductions. In terms of resources, there's limited scope there really. It's essentially either using council tax or using reserves and balances, and I've touched on the issues we face in that sense already. In terms of the budget reduction proposals for this year, we've had a couple of the budget working groups already, and there's another one scheduled, which I think would be useful after the budget settlement. We've moved away this year from setting those percentage targets for services, and instead services have been asked to consider options in light of a statutory minimum service, and also to look at opportunities where income can be maximised. So those proposals are currently in the process of being considered by the budget working groups, and decisions on the inclusion of any budget reductions in the recommended budget can be taken following the settlement. In terms of council tax, members have already resolved to increase the rate of the council tax premium that's applied to long-term empty homes and to second homes, and using the latest council tax base data, that will generate just over an additional £1.5 million, which has been included in the net position shown in Table 1. In terms of what a 1% increase in council tax means for a bandy property, it would be £17.33 per year, and a 1% increase increases the net council tax income after setting aside any money in terms of council tax reduction scheme by just under £800,000. There's a number of risks that are built into these assumptions, and they're set out in Table 2 within Section 7. Again, I don't propose to go through those in any detail, but they're categorised there. And again, if there are any questions, rather, we can pick those up at the end. The resource shortfall does its best to take account of those risks, but I guess it does demonstrate the importance of maintaining prudent reserves and balances to protect the authority and its services that are provided to the people of Conway. A particular concern is the impact of the unforeseen service demands, as well as pressure around pay. We also know that in the current year, not all of the savings put forward by services are going to be delivered. And then just finally, in terms of the greatest risk of all, if you like, is the risk of financial failure and the inability of members to set a balanced budget, which would include a Section 114 report being issued to members to address such a failure should it arise. That arises when it's clear that the expenditure incurred and to be incurred is likely to exceed the resources that are available. Subject to the settlement, Conway will only be able to set a balanced budget next year by members making difficult choices. There is therefore a real risk that Conway may find itself in such a position, and every piece of advice available indicates that we must do everything as officers and members to avoid such a scenario. And just finally, in terms of next steps, as has been mentioned a few times, we'll receive the draft settlement on the 11th of December. Members will receive a report in early January, which will set out that position and also provide more detail on the various business cases and the budget reduction proposals that have been put forward for consideration. There'll be a further report then in February after that meeting. And then finally, the report on the recommended budget for 25-26, council tax and the associated resolutions will be presented to full council on the 27th of February. Diolch.
Diolch, Gareth. very comprehensive run through. So, members, who's got questions? Oh, first one, Councillor Louise, Councillor Gareth. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for still wearing my coat. I'm feeling a bit chilly this morning. Crikey, this is feel like I'm back in the Rose Garden with Keir Starmer in the summer. This is incredibly depressing budget and a little bit scary actually, because there's so many unknowns at this stage, particularly around schools. I don't know who sits on the school budget forum, but I've got a question about whether schools have been given any indication of how bad it's going to be, or whether it's going to be okay. Maybe they haven't. So that's one question. The NI, obviously town councils and community councils have been told that they can't claim the NI back, which is obviously a bit of a concern with the pressures of us wanting to fund services for the county as well. The business cases I've always been, I've never been comfortable, even when I was on cabinet, with the way that we ask services to make cuts with one hand, and then we come up with a list of business cases from the same services with the other. So it feels like we're taking from one and giving to another. So I'm sure the business cases will be coming from social care and education, probably ERF. And yet the last two budget working groups, we were looking at pretty uncomfortable cuts in those same services. So I can never work that one out. I wonder if you can sort of help me with that, Gareth, as to why we sort of take with one hand and then give with another. And then the final question, maybe for Gareth, is about the Fire Authority. Why do they want another £1 million? So School Budget Forum, who sits on it? Because I've never been to any of those. Fire Authority, why do they want another £1 million? And this idea of cuts in one department, but then they come for business cases in another. That's my three questions. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Louise. Gareth?
Yeah, no, thank you. In terms of the school budget forum, we haven't, I think there was a meeting 2 weeks ago, maybe now. Because of the uncertainty, it's very difficult to give them a figure. So no bigger ask, if you like, at this stage has been provided to schools. I guess it forms part of the overall discussions, doesn't it, over the coming month in particular, where that information does be clear around to what extent schools are going to need to contribute to the situation. And again, it very much depends on that. You highlighted uncertainty as that is probably the key word that I would pick out of this, to be honest, because there is so much uncertainty. It's very difficult to predict until we get that information on the 11th. But also beyond that, there's information that we're hearing we might receive some money in year, but as yet we've had no clarity around that to help with some of our in-year pressures. What we then don't know is that going to be baselined into the settlement for next year? So I think what we're going to see over the coming few weeks, really, in the run up to Christmas and the week or two after that, is the piece of the jigsaw starting to fall into piece a little bit, and then we'll have that clarity, which would be which is what members need ultimately, isn't it, to be able to make those decisions around budget reductions and pressures. In terms of, I can see exactly why you're saying that around the process for the business case. I think it's probably transparency is the main reason, I would say, around that. I think it's important, rather than just saying, well, here's our net ask. I think putting everything on the table in terms of these are our pressures, these are the things that we can do elsewhere within the service to alleviate those pressures on the overall budget, I think is the main reason that it's done in that way, but others might have anything to add to that. I think that's from my perspective, it would be the obvious way to do it, rather than just saying, well, this is the net ask. I think having that overall picture of, well, these are the pressures, but these are the things that we can also do to alleviate some of that pressure. The Fire Authority, I think we're waiting to hear. I've not heard anything specific. So that, again, when we talk about uncertainty, we know there's been a big ask in terms of the Fire Authority in previous years. There's members who may well be more cited than I am, and Amanda is, maybe even around some of the discussions that are going on there around what the levy ask might be for next year. So there's a figure in there at the moment. Hopefully it won't be as high as that. Was that all the points? Yeah.
Reen's just going to come in and answer.
Yeah, I think Gareth's covered it already, but that uncertainty around everything is really difficult at the moment, and it's in a usual year it's difficult enough, but this year has been even worse because the national insurance element has come into it as well, which is, actually made the figures go up. So when you get a good budget in terms of local government, you expect that to come down immediately. But the NI has created so much uncertainty, and we are still seeking clarity. Whether we'll get that clarity on the 11th, I'm not sure. It may be after Christmas that we'll get clarity on the NI position. There is allowance, but you know, whether it covers everything, I'm not sure. On the business cases, I think the point I would make is the ask has been around unavoidable business cases, so that they are driven by things we have no choice on. And you will see, you know, again, these have been put to one side for the moment, just to await the settlement, just to understand what the envelope is more than anything else. And that will drive those business cases around what's acceptable or not. Some of it, there's no choice. So some of the pressures around children, for example, where we know the costs are going up, and that's just the envelope. We have to cover that. But others, there will be a choice around either paring down or removing from the business cases. So that the quantum before you hear is the top end at the moment. So hopefully we'll get that clarity post the 11th. It'll give us the idea of the actual envelope then. So yeah.
You're green. Some head teachers have said that there's a possibility of being told of 10% cuts to schools. That's what some head teachers have said. Take it that's not a figure that's been mentioned.
It's certainly not a figure that's been mentioned by Amanda or myself in any of the discussions that we've been in now.
Okay, thank you very much. You content, Councillor Louise? Lovely, thank you. Now go on to Councillor Gareth.
Thank you. I'll just try and pick up a few points from the report, and I agree with Councillor Louise that it does paint a really, really difficult picture. And I note the recommendations are that we just note the report, but I think as a committee we need to be a little bit stronger than that. I know what has happened, but we need to learn from what's happened and be a bit more proactive going forward as far as I'm concerned. I think we should take heed of what Gareth was saying in the need to build up reserves, and we should take heed from what's happened over the last few years in that we've set balanced budgets, yet we've always, for whatever reasons, and there's really valid reasons, we've always gone over those budgets and had to take actual money from reserves. And we're reaching a stage now where, you know, the reserves are getting really, really low. So my first recommendation is that we actually built in a contingency figure in our budget, within that balanced budget. And if you were, you know, if we were to look back and say, actually, we were short by 5 million this year, maybe we should build in a contingency of 5 million for next year's budget. And if we don't use that contingency, then that goes into reserves. So it gives us a bit of leeway and it aids that planning. So my recommendation is that we actually recommend that we build in a £5 million contingency. I'm willing to listen if somebody's got other figures, or, you know, I'm trying to steer clear of putting a percentage in there, that we put a specific amount. My second recommendation is looking at 7.4 in Appendix 1. It talks there about pulling cuts forward from 2026 to 27. You know, I'm not cited on what those cuts are or what those proposals are. And it also says that short-term, you know, we can't do any short-term cuts. And it mentions there that we're going to have to do a strategic review. So I'm wondering, you know, what have we been doing for the last 3 years as far as the long-term and medium-term planning is concerned in those strategic reviews? You know, have we just been shuffling the deck chairs round on the Titanic? So my second recommendation is that as a committee that we say that we need to conduct that strategic review and conclude it. Again, my recommendation would be 6 months, so that we actually put some actions into our proposals. And my third point is a question, really, just so that can help my understanding for the budgeting process. And it's probably directed towards Charlie for next year. You know, as far as council tax increases are concerned, because really that's the only, that's the lever we've got to bridge those gaps, is how do we approach it? Do we set, or have we got an increase, a council tax increase in mind, and do we set the budgets to that? Or do we set the budgets and then that tells us what the council tax increase should be? It's semantics, but yeah, what's our strategy as a council? Are we setting the council taxes and then that drives the budget, or do we set the budgets and will that then drive the council tax increase? Thank you.
Councillor Charlie.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question, Gareth. We have absolutely tried to minimise use of balances over the last couple of years, where it's only been absolutely avoidable. We've certainly not shored budgets up. It's for things that come along at the last minute, that usually around pay rise and things last year. We've no choice. So as a principle, do not want to go anywhere near our reserves, because that's the wrong thing to do, especially when they're as low as they are. Unfortunately, that's not what happened in the past. Many budgets were balanced using reserves. They didn't start as the lowest in Wales. They were gradually brought down to that level. People fail to recognise the importance of bringing our council tax up, because it's deeply, deeply unpopular with residents. We've had 2 effective 10% rises over the last 2 years at a time when there's a cost of living crisis. That's incredibly challenging for people. In terms of putting forward that we put 5 million into reserves, that equates to a 6% increase in council tax. I'm not saying that's one way we can get £5 million, is by baking in a 6% increase in the council tax before we look at anything else. And we're in a really difficult situation here. We're in a difficult situation with the challenge that we face, but we're also in the lack of knowledge we have, or the amount of moving parts. I think it would be premature to be making these sort of decisions now until we actually see that the challenge that is there. I don't think you can decide where that council tax needs to be at the moment, but I am acutely aware that it's a real struggle for people to pay these figures every year. So we have a really difficult balance to meet every single year. We're now in a situation where some of the cuts we're talking about, even the sort of relatively small amounts, are services that residents really value. We've seen the protests here about closing some of our toilet facilities. It's incredibly difficult to do that. The percentage of council tax people pay as a whole of our budget has risen year on year, but because the big sum, the aggregate external funding, was down, people are paying more, but often getting less unless you're using social services. You're just not seeing those services being there. So I think it has to be a balance. I don't think we can just say we're going to spend that much, therefore council tax equals this much, because I think that would give us a very, very difficult answer. I know a couple of years ago at one of the final meetings you raised something similar, and it would have been 12.5 to meet the gap, because so early days. I feel a bit like, for those history aficionados, in the Second World War, when war was declared, there was nothing happened for the first 6 or 7 months. We're in that really difficult phase here, where we know we've got really difficult challenges to face, but we do not know the quantum of that until another couple of weeks, and then we'll have to work that through. So yeah, I would just caution making these concrete decisions as to what we're baking into this budget until we have full knowledge of those figures, Gareth. But I absolutely know where you're coming from in terms of needing to protect and grow our reserves.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. I think Reen wants to come in.
Yeah, Gareth. Yes, on the contingency figure, yes. As Gareth mentioned, we need to build reserves up. How much is affordable or not, we'll probably know after the 11th. So I wouldn't disagree. We do need to build our reserves up. The pressures over the past 2 years, especially, has meant that that in-year pressure building up in different areas means that we need more resilience. So if we can, we must try and build those reserves up. In terms of the strategic review element, the plan at the moment is to bring all the work that's been going on forward to this committee as part of the medium-term financial plan review. So you'll see all the streams of work, hopefully, that has been going on there. Some of that has been instigated through work we've done with SIPFA. So and is just a first part of some work that we're doing, looking at different services. But I guess putting it in the medium-term financial review context probably makes sense, in that it will bridge those gaps, or will help to bridge those gaps that you mentioned around the 26-27 budget, which, you know, we really need to get a grip of, because, you know, that's the next phase. So this year ends, well, clearly, you know, we need to have that longer term view. I think 3-year settlements would help that, really help that, because especially over the past 2 years, because of the peaks that we've seen in terms of pressures, we would really benefit from having a 3-year window to look at what you need to do over those 3-year periods and plan accordingly. When you go year to year, especially when you've got peaks and troughs, last year there was nothing extra in the settlement. This year there may be, and we don't know until the 11th of December what that's likely to be. So that is really unhelpful in the context of when you're trying to plan medium term or longer as to bridge those gaps. So but work has been going on. I wouldn't want anybody to think there isn't. You know, you've seen the resilience plan, but there's a lot of other stuff that's going on, and we'll try and bring those together for you within the medium term financial plan review process. So hopefully in the next few months.
So on that strategic review, my recommendation or my proposal that we move that within 6 months is a very manageable timescale then, Rhyn?
I guess what will come with the medium-term financial plan review, which will be, you know, I don't want to speak with Amanda not being here, but, you know, it's his work she's doing at the moment. That will give you the roadmap then, I guess, around what needs to be done. And, you know, it will be some kind of change program that you're looking at across services. I know Councillor Rann has requested it previously as well, around bringing all these streams together. So that's what we'll do. And then it'll be a question of them prioritising what we need to do moving forward over the next 2 to 3 years then to try and bridge those gaps. So yeah, in terms of the proposal, I've no objection to that, because you will see that. But the minutiae within that, you may want to see that before setting a timetable for the wider well, it'll be for Cabinet to set the timetable for the further
I just feel that we're not in a position where we can let things drift, and I just think we need to put some timescales in it. As far as building the contingency for reserves are concerned, I note what our leader said, but I still think we need to put something in there. So I'd like to amend my initial proposal to say that we recommend that we build in a meaningful contingency within our setting a balanced budget. So rather than set, as I initially was thought, 5 million, to give everybody a bit of wriggle room, and it is only a recommendation anyway, but I think listening to SIPFA and listening to Gareth and being prudent, we should be building in a contingency there into the budget. Thank you.
Dear Councillor Gareth. We now move on to, we've got Councillor David online, then Councillor Paul in the room, then Councillor Abdul online. So Councillor David. Oh, hang on, give us all
Thank
time
you, Chair.
to pop our headphones on. We've still got dodgy connections in here. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to set the background to this, because we have a very different experience in Conway than a lot of councils in England that went for several years without any council tax increase at all, and they had the pressures of inflation. Just to remind everyone that in the last 6 budgets that we've had, we've increased council tax by 54%, and taking inflation into account, we've had a 25% real terms increase. So really, to go back to the residents again with more very high council tax increases in the current situation, you know, I would caution on that. We do need to balance the budget, absolutely, and I agree with that. We need to look at the non-essential spending in the council, really, and that's what we never seem to do. And I made all these points in the budget, and really nothing's been done. We're back here again with nothing being done, really. If you look on the council website, we're hiring, no freeze on jobs. We're actually employing more people now than we were last year, because I think, as Councillor Paul sort of recognised as well, that we're actually employing more people. Where we're employing the people as well, I have the concerns that we're getting rid of people providing frontline services in the street cleaning, the refuse and things like that, people are gone. I think we've lost 32 jobs there. But we're employing too many people in non-essential services, bureaucratic sort of jobs, really. And people can say they're essential. I mean, this seems to be the argument. What is an essential job and what isn't an essential job? And I'm very clear that providing those frontline services to keep the streets clean and to maintain our schools and to keep social services viable, they're the frontline jobs. There's too many jobs in this council that I would sort of say are not frontline jobs. But again, that's the disagreement. But you do need to look now to actually freeze recruitment. We can't, in the current situation, carry on year employing more people. I mean, there are pressures on services. I agree with that, but they're not actually being met. You know, in the frontline services that my residents that are really bothered about. Like last year, we had the explosion of the weeds, and that saved a small amount of money. But the misery it caused for people and the upset it caused for people to see the roads and the pavements in that state. So really, and I think we really need to do to sit down now and actually look and actually define what is an essential and what is a non-essential job in this council. Now, if we do that, we could move on. Thank you.
Dear Councillor David, who wants to answer that? Oh, Reid.
Yeah, I think this argument has been rehearsed at every meeting over the past couple of months, and I will give the same response as I've given every time. All the services we provide for the council are essential. The frontline services are supported by back office staff who are equally as important to the running of this council as anybody else. And I would make the point, as I've made countless times on this one, we have a vacancy control process in place that scrutinises every single vacancy that comes before us. Councillor Carr may disagree with that, but I sit on that, and I can assure you every single vacancy that comes forward is scrutinised by both myself and Amanda and Fran. So we have a more robust process of analysing those posts as any local authority that I'm aware of. So I would like to dismiss this myth that we are, all that we need to do is put money in the frontline services. There are services sitting behind that make those roles absolutely work to the benefit of our residents every day. So we've responded to this question countless times now, and I'd just like to make that point one final time. Thank you.
Diolch, Reid. Gareth, you want to answer? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just wanted to respond to Councillor David's specific point around council tax and the comparison with England. I think a key difference between Wales and England at the moment is the way that local government accounts for special educational needs, as it's called in England, or ALN in Wales. I think in England there's billions at the moment that is off the accounts of the councils at the moment because of a statutory override. I think the reality was if that was on the accounts, an awful lot more councils would have been bankrupt than is currently the case. So there's a very subtle but important and big distinction to be made between the current, yes, it's capped in terms of council tax in England, whereas Wales isn't. You could argue that the non-capping in Wales has enabled those authorities to continue to not have every school in significant deficit because of the way that the ALN is funded. So there is that significant. I think the NAO were predicting 4.6 billion by March 26 in terms of a deficit in England.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Councillor David, are you content with those answers?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I make these points because I think they're valid points, and these are the points that residents are making. I'm just an amplifier for what residents are saying. Now, I don't believe that this communication strategy we spend all this money on, and you can go into social media, Conway giving a lot of it is just sort of public service announcements and things like that. I don't see that as an essential job. I see people cleaning the streets, emptying the bins, maintaining the parks, those jobs that were lost. I see those as essential jobs. So there is a fundamental difference. They're not, but these jobs are not backroom jobs for frontline service. A lot of these jobs, I don't think. Engagement officers to speak to sort of the clerks of local authorities, jobs like that. You know, really, I think you do need to sit down and look at at these jobs, because there is a disagreement here because my point is some of these jobs that I don't think this time in our financial sort of situation we should be expanding some of these jobs. To me and to my residents, we don't class them as frontline services, and we don't class them as backups to frontline services, and we're in the same situation every year. And we've got a council manager that just doesn't listen. You don't listen, you dismiss it. Like you said, oh, you've mentioned this so many times, but every time you don't listen, right? And maybe councillors, when we're looking at jobs, frontline jobs or whatever jobs that we're going to sort of advertise, maybe councillors should also be involved, because we're not involved in that. We're not involved in the recruitment. As you said, it's yourself and the head of personnel and the head of finance that's looking at it. Perhaps some fresh eyes on it for councillors, particularly backbench councillors, to look at some of these jobs. Perhaps that would be a way forward. Thank you.
Dear Councillor David. We now move to next question. Is Councillor Paul in the room?
Thank you for letting me ask a question, Chair. Both for Charlie and Gareth's benefit, I'm focusing on paragraph 4.9, table 1, and the resource shortfalls. And I'm going to drill down on some specific questions, if that's okay. The first one is, it says, add back one-off business cases, 2024-25, a sum of 1.4 million. Can you just remind us what that means and what those business cases are? Going on, in terms of capital financing and the borrowing and interest costs, and Gareth and I have had a series of discussions about this and emails. The financial stability review that the Bank of England published on Friday further indicated to us that the Bank of England are estimating further interest rate increases going forward now, consequent of the budget, the UK budget. And that will obviously impact on us. We don't know, we can't estimate fully, but I think that report integrates the direction that interest rates are likely to go. And so that is a key issue. And I know Gareth, because he's very, very good at keeping you up to date. I know even in recent weeks, significant sums of money have been moved from short-term borrowing to longer-term borrowing to try and manage that. It's not a science, this. You're having to make judgments on a daily basis, but we do need to look at those interest costs going forward. I'd like to also know about the PFI unitary charge. What projects does that relate to, and why is this a one-off additional cost to us in this financial year? If Gareth could just explain why that has appeared now. And then just to pick up on something that Louise was beginning to explore, and that is the school situation. Now they're facing pay pressures not just from teaching staff but from non-teaching staff in school. And I was concerned because I was at the finance committee of one of my governing bodies last week that schools are now being asked to pay in year an additional insurance premium to cover the supply staff for both teaching and non-teaching staff in school. And these sums, well, in this primary school, and I suspect other primary schools, quite significant amounts of additional premium in year. Now, I'm told, this has all been discussed at school budget forum, but But like Louise says, most of us are not cited on what goes on in school budget forum. And people have heard my criticism of this in the past. There are a select number of councillors on the school budget forum. The same is true on the Education Capital Programme Board. And some really quite big decisions are taken within those forums. And I'm unhappy that doesn't, we get the minutes of those. Well, we get the minutes of the school budget forum when we have an education and schools overview and scrutiny meeting. You can access the corporate, not the corporate, the education capital board minutes, but it's pretty tortuous to get hold of them. And again, it's usually weeks after the event. So I think that does need to be looked at. But I think that in-year premium increase, insurance premium increase for schools, which is for some schools thousands of pounds, is concerning. I also want to raise the issue because at my governing body finance committee, we discovered when we looked at the 6-month outturn report, and if you remember what was decided, that we wouldn't get monthly outturn reports for schools now, we would get quarterly ones because of both the workload and because of the efficiency of having accurate figures. And we discovered, the school I was in, that we'd been given a £10,000 loan, even though we, in our final budget, we hadn't asked for one, we hadn't signed off on one, so that we were getting a £10,000 loan with interest costs of £1,015 on the £10,000 loan. So again, now we may just be one of those one-off examples that's a mistake, but I would be concerned if other schools have been given loans in their budget, which they didn't sign off on, and maybe if they didn't scrutinise their budget absolutely closely, they may not have even seen it as just one line in the budget. So I'm sorry, there's a whole series of questions there, but I'd be grateful if we could drill down on some of that detail.
Thank you very much, Councillor Paul. We've got 5 questions, I think. Have you got a note of those, Gareth? Are you able to?
Yeah, I think.
Start? I think the first one is the clarity around the one-off business case.
Yeah, I think Ewan's going to provide an answer to that one. I'll pick the rest up. Thank you.
Hi, Ewan Alverton, Principal Accountant. I think it's a typo in the table, actually. It should say one-off budget reductions. So this is where budget reductions were put forward for 24-25, but were for only 1 year. So they become a pressure in 25-26 because they're no longer savings.
So did we fund that 1.4 million out of reserves last year?
I don't believe we did. Not all of it, no.
So how was that funded?
It was funded like any of our other spend through AEF council tax.
Right. So why is it being added in again this year, that amount? If it's within the budget, why is it being added back in?
If I can come in on that, I think what you'll find, Councillor Paul, through the budget process and through the business case process, that some will be one-off at the time. Soon they're submitted, there'll be a one-off business case for 1 year only. Others will be a recurring pressure. I think what that's reflecting is the fact that there's potentially, and I haven't got the detail in front of me, so I need to come back to you with the specifics around what makes up that. Is it 1.4 million? But what Amanda is saying, we need to build that back in because it was a one-off potentially last year, whatever it relates to, but it's still there as a pressure, and it's prudent to include it now, which is what she's done.
It would be good, Chair, to get that detail.
Yes, yeah. If we could ask on that first question, if we could have a written explanation circulated to the committee, would be great, Gareth. Thank you very much.
Okay, in terms of the other points that were raised, my understanding of the cost of borrowing is different to yours in terms of what was being explained in the Bank of England report. I don't think the Bank of England report is saying that UK base rate is going to be increased. In fact, that's not what it is saying at all. What it's saying is that there's additional global uncertainty as a result of the recent events in terms of the election in America, the ongoing conflict around various parts of the world, which again creates further uncertainty. Now that's talking about global money markets. The indications are that there will be an impact in terms of UK base rate, but that I think the direction of travel is a continuation of what we've seen recently, where there's been 2 quarter-point reductions in base rate, albeit it's going to be slower than was originally forecast and not go maybe as low as was originally forecast. So that's my reading of that report. It's not for 1 minute saying that we can expect an increase back up to 5.5% interest rates. So that's the first point there.
I mean, in a sense, just to come back on that, I mean, we borrow money in the real world based on the global money markets. So at this point, the Bank of England may not be indicating they're going to specifically raise the base rate. But if the money markets globally are increasing their interest rates to borrowers, whether public or private borrowers, that is also our reality, because we have to borrow money on the financial markets. I know we've got the Public Loans Board. I'm not disputing that we've got the Public Loans Board, but we do borrow money on the wider financial markets as all public bodies do.
It's the Public Works Loans Board that we borrow with. Yeah, like I said, there's likely to be an impact. I think it's maybe a different impact than you're maybe reading into that. And obviously, there is that uncertainty, and we've seen through the past decade, if it's taught us nothing else, it's shown us that global economic shocks have a big impact and a lasting impact. So we can prepare as best as we can. As I explained at the weekend to you, we as members will know, we liaise very closely with our very good Treasury advisors, Arlene Close, and they will be factoring in information like you're referring to, along with other information in terms of markets and economic outlook and forecasts. And we work closely with them around the timing of borrowing, the nature of that borrowing, and similarly with the investment side as well. In terms of the PFI unitary charge, I think that's just reflecting there's a need. Obviously, we've got, in terms of what it relates to, it's the 3 secondary schools that we have, which that PFI arrangement comes to a conclusion at the end of, I think the summer of 2029, and there's preparations underway in terms of that exit strategy at the moment. The additional money, I think, is reflecting that there's a need there, because it will fluctuate from 1 year to the next, again, that depending on interest rates, depending on utility charges and those kind of things. So it's reflecting there's a need to put some more into that PFI reserve. So that's again managing. To not do that would just create a pressure for us, which we'd have to pay.
Could I just come back on that, Gareth? So
Just briefly, Councillor Paul.
Are we doing the same with the PFI for Coed Pethla?
It's a completely different arrangement in terms of Coed Pethla, as I understand it. I think it's a lease arrangement rather than a PFI.
So those additional costs which they can charge us on an annual basis.
There's more certainty in terms of the lease charges on Coed Pethla than there are with the PFI arrangement.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Okay. The other 2 areas, like I said the weekend, I don't think the 2 matters that you did raise with me were matters for this committee, but seeing as you've raised them and I do have answers now, I'm more than happy to provide that clarification to you around the school that you're referring to. So we did actually notify the £10,000 loan that your school requested, and they did request it, was confirmed in writing in May 2024. So we'll pick that up with the schools separately. It's been reflected in the monitoring report. We haven't actually done the accounting treatment for that yet. So if there's no longer the need for that, then we'll just adjust that back. In terms of interest, as you know, isn't being charged to the school anyway. It's being absorbed from the balances on the overall investment goals. And then the insurance costs, the implication there is that that's somehow a finance related matter, where in reality it isn't. It's managed by the schools in terms of the insurance process you're referring to, which again, I can send you the detailed update on that around how it's run, but it's basically the head teachers and governing bodies that run the scheme and set the rules for that.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
that, Gareth. Thank you, Councillor Paul, for those questions. We now move on to, we've got Councillor Abdul and Councillor Anne online. Councillor Abdul, just give us a
Good morning,
chance to get
Chair.
our headphones on. Okay.
For that, Chair, I just want to second Councillor Gareth Jones' proposal, please, of recommendation.
Dear Councillor Abdul.
Croeso.
We now move on to Councillor Anne. Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Anne.
Sorry, Chair. I would have raised similar questions to Councillor Louise around business cases, around schools, and a number of other areas. But the one thing I probably just start off with here is today I was expecting a report on the resilience plan or the transformation plan or whatever we're actually sort of calling it. And I was led to believe that was happening. I'm not sure if that's the report that you referred to earlier, Chair. But I must admit, I mean, I think Irene has raised it that I keep talking about what are we doing in terms of transformation, and obviously that it's coming in terms of whatever our planning and acting is. But thinking strategically and more importantly, acting strategically and timely is really where we should have been some time ago. And as a backbencher, there we have no, although this is what this committee is made up of, we just don't have the information that provides the assurance that our
Councillor Anne, could you just turn your camera off, because just try talking without the camera. It's going very wobbly here in the chamber.
Okay,
Thanks.
sorry about that. So I don't know how much of that you got. Very much I was expecting a report today on what we've been doing and planning and potentially acting on resilience and transformation. And I'm not sure if that's the report that you suggested as being cancelled. But as FROSC members here, I mean, I've just been reflecting on the points raised and the answers given. And obviously, there's little, we don't have the sense of that action or timely action, and that's part of the frustration that I have and potentially others have, because we actually don't see us going in the right direction to actually strategically get ourselves out of the place that we're in. I mean, we had a presentation by SIPFA in the last couple of weeks who made it absolutely clear. Don't obsess on whether you've got the right funding coming from Welsh Government, because you have to live within the budgets that you're given. And that's the point that really concerns me, because I know we've got a worst case scenario here, but it's the beginning of December. In essence, it's probably only sort of 8-9 working weeks to actually us being expected to approve a balanced budget, and the knowledge and the insight to be able to do that seems a long way away. Now, a number of councils, even in this year, are still going out to consultation with the residents on their planned budget reductions, and obviously we are nowhere near that. We haven't planned to do it, although I've raised it and had assurances that we will. But the point that I'm just evidence here is that the fact that we haven't even come to us with those publicly with those budget reductions to start actually making sort of decisions and consulting with the public is this reflection of where are we really in terms of acting strategically within the budget constraints. The last thing I want us to do is to actually call in other people to actually do our balanced budget for us. So can I have an explanation as to why, although I was led to believe that we were going to have a report on the resilience plan, transformation plan, that was recommended nearly 2 years ago by the peer review group, that yet again it's now the last meeting, I think, in December, a public meeting, and we haven't had it. Thanks, Chair.
Dear Councillor Anne, the report I was referring to this morning was the audit procurement plan that's been deferred. It needed more work on it, apparently. Councillor Charlie's going to come in and answer all your points there. Thank you for that.
We talk a lot about medium-term financial plans. Now, clearly, the only way you can have a proper medium-term financial plan is you have an idea what your budget is over a number of years. I attended a meeting in the WLGA. The Minister for Finance, Mark Drakeford, said that the UK government will look to give Wales a 3-year budget after a fiscal event next spring. The situation we're in, where we get varying budgets really late in the day, so we're looking at the 11th of December, and we've got to get that budget forward in a couple of months. I mean, that's absolutely crazy. You don't know how good it's going to be, and you don't know how bad it's going to be. So there are costs to lots of things. If you start looking at redundancies, you trigger a lot of things off, which are incredibly difficult. You can close things down and then realize it wasn't as bad as it had to be. So you cannot plan for any degree of certainty unless you've got a proper period of time and where you can, and then you can iron out some of those peaks and troughs as well over a 3-year period. Obviously, NHS trusts have a 3-year period in which they have to set a balanced budget, but we have one, so that remains incredibly challenging. And I don't think you can underestimate the amount of time that it actually takes for senior officers actually trying just to get a balanced budget every year. Time would be better spent if you set a 3-yearly budget. You could sort of focus on other areas of change. I attended a special WLGA seminar in Adnoddau, Wales last week. I think it was last week after you were there, and Amanda did a presentation. There were 3 presentations of councils who were at the forefront of delivering change, and I have to say what Amanda presented and what we're actually doing is far more advanced than many other councils. Reen, maybe you'll touch about when that sort of report's going to come through the democratic process, but there's lots of things we're doing. And again, I'd like to agree with Reen, the points that Councillor David made. I don't think any of our staff are not doing anything other than it's essential. I think that committee that scrutinises every single new employee, that's not happening elsewhere. We have 6,000 staff, 4,000 full-time equivalent. That's a huge amount of work, but I think it highlights that we are committed to looking at every single spend, and not just whether it's the right money to spend, it's the relative spend. We're in a situation now where I don't feel our officers put anything forward which you wouldn't want to support, but it's balancing that up between what we can afford and what is more essential. But that work happens all the time. So we will see where we are. There will be another consultation with the public that is going to be out before Christmas. I haven't got the exact date to hand. It will be along the lines of what we did last year in terms of what services they would like to protect the most. But we don't have the figures, so therefore we can't put meaningful figures into any consultation because we haven't got that yet. So that's incredibly frustrating. I'd rather know exactly what we were facing in terms of challenge. And this would be a much more meaningful meeting if we actually had some figures to deal with, but that's not the case. That needs to change because councils need to have more certainty and our services need to have more certainty. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. I think Reen wants to come in, Councillor Anne, to answer, to cover some more.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Anne. I understand the points you make, and clearly without the information before you, I can understand the frustration. It wasn't lined up to come today, just to be clear, but I can understand the need for it to come as soon as possible. And I've been working over the past 6 weeks with colleagues to try and bring something together. So it's really about trying to bring together the work that is being done, but also then to look at what we want to prioritise moving forward over the next 2 or 3 years. So we'll try and get that as soon as we possibly can. And I think that's what I'll say to you. But I want to make it clear that it's not that there hasn't been any strategic thinking over the past 2 years around this. You know, if you look at some of the work that's gone on. So, for example, the work with SIPFA around, so we have the budgetary control stuff that has come through, the resilience plan, which I know some might not regard as change, modernisation, but actually the effect it's had is to sharpen up our financial controls to make sure that we're not spending money unnecessarily. So that's one element. Some work has been done, as was mentioned by SIPFA in their presentation, around social care pressures, work around professional and other services and the skills and reviews, so mapping those skills across different services, see where they sit. So that work is ongoing. As you mentioned before, around estates asset management, that work is progressing. I missed, unfortunately, my headphones died in the middle of your last question, Anne, so I didn't hear what you had to say. But the work on the asset management, we had a presentation at SLT last week, so that's imminent as well to raise further discussions on that, and looking at things like the corporate landlord model, which is certainly other local authorities have seen the benefit of. We are fully aware of the housing and homelessness programme and the change that's happening within that service to try to modernise and change the way we operate. There's work around the education estate, budget management as well, you know, that we've had the financial system, so we are looking at that, and I can go on and on. But what I would like to do is to bring these together, Anne, so that you can see, but also looking at how we affect that wider change, that corporate strategic change that we need for the 26-27 year, really, because let's be honest, what we're doing at the moment, and it is dictated, as I said previously, really by that year to year budget setting, which is not conducive at all to longer term planning. So what we're hoping is that what we're doing will align with that feeling that we're getting at the moment from central government and Welsh government that 3-year settlement is the way forward. So hopefully our transformation plan, or whatever you want to call it, will be able to align with that. So I apologise that we haven't been able to bring something sooner to you, but it's definitely something I've been actively discussing with colleagues over the past 6 to 7 weeks to try and get something together. Yeah.
Thank you, Reen. Councillor Anne?
No, I just think I'll accept and thank Reen for his feedback. Obviously, it was a member of the cabinet that had advised me that this would happen. So I was really disappointed. I think it is just this piece about, as backbenchers, Froscar are desperate to actually influence and learn. And obviously help us get on this transformational resilience sort of footing that we're talking about, because I appreciate that getting internal controls are right. I mean, I would absolutely expect that to be fundamental in any organisation. But it is this piece about the change that we here in Conwy need to make. And, you know, Rena's gone through some of the thinking and acting on some of that change, but both us as backbenchers and, more importantly, the public don't actually understand any of that. And of course, they then hear about, you know, £5 million overspends in year, and then obviously now over £31 million sort of shortfall. So it's really important that not only the members are kept informed and in the middle of all of this, but also so is the public. So I would hope and expect that I won't have to ask about this, you know, in the next sort of month or two, that it will actually be on the agenda. So thanks, Reen.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. Councillor Charlie, will this report that's coming, will it be from Councillor Emily and the transformation agenda, or will it be from you?
I'll have to confirm that at a later date, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Diolch. Oh, Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, just like, you know, what Councillor Anne was saying is very similar to what I was trying to say earlier on. I accept that it's an absolute nightmare having the specific budgets at the last minute and trying to work to those, and that's what to me, that seems to be what we're trying to do. We're actually reacting when the budget's arrived and trying to put a bit of work in beforehand. You know, since I joined the council, the indications have always been that the budgets are on a downward trend. And there's nothing that I can see with change of government or anything like that that's going to change that. And probably for the next 2-3 years, we've got to plan and put strategies in place to cope with reducing budgets. We've got to do more for less, or maybe do less. And that's where I'm coming in, and I presume where Councillor Rand's coming in with that need for that strategic planning, those strategic reviews. Yes, if we get more than we thought we were going to get, great. But we can't keep going from 12 months to 12 months. We've got to be looking over a longer period. And I don't think we can wait and hope that the Welsh Government are going to bring in a 3-year budget. We should act now. And a plan is a plan. It's not, we don't stick blindly to a plan, but it gives that strategy and direction of travel. And then we react to what's actually put in front of us. Thank you.
Deal, Councillor Gareth. Councillor David online, is that a new hand?
Yes, Chair, just one question, and it's the question that residents really are asked. We see from a resident's point of view, services cut, staff cut, providing frontline services like the street cleaning and that. The fundamental question is, we're cutting basic services, we're putting council tax up, but we're employing more staff. Why are we employing more staff when we're cutting services? I mean, that's a fundamental question that I'm being asked by residents, and perhaps that could be answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor David. I think we've already done that one. Reen, did you want to just?
Yeah, I'll reiterate what I said earlier, but also around we had a very long discussion a couple of frosks ago around the dashboard, around workforce dashboard, which I think covered the majority of the information that's required there. I don't think I have anything further to add. The only thing I would reiterate is a lot of these new roles will be either grant funded posts, and that is part of the analysis that both myself, Amanda and Fran undertake, but also they will be as a result of decisions that we've made as a council. So for example, if we're bringing services back into the local authority, we know we have in social care, for example, some fantastic new provision that's coming online. Now that can't run itself, and that will need people to run that. So the numbers going up will inevitably lead from there. You know, you're talking tens of extra staff going in there. And also, if you have, say, 100 new staff coming in, you will inevitably need that back office support to help that, be that through business support, legal, accountancy, HR, etc. So it's not as simple as to say the numbers are going up. It's a lot more complicated than that. And it is the majority of the numbers you're talking about would be either grant funded or posts that have come as a consequence of decisions that we as a council have made.
Diolch, Reen. I think we've now got Councillor Andrew online. Have I just seen your hand go up?
Yes, Chair, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
I'd just like you to maybe intervene. Councillor Carr keeps coming up with the same questions time and time again. And unfortunately, this has come, as Reen has said many times beforehand. I'd just ask him to, everybody's got the right to have their own opinion, but we just talk about the same things again and he gets proper qualified answers. So I would like, if you can intervene next time, Chair, I'd be appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. Well, everyone's entitled to have a voice here on FROSC. It's not like cabinet. I let everyone speak, and I think all their questions should be heard. But
the same questions time and time again, Chair.
Oh, hang on. Say that again.
The same questions time and time again. No, I've got to stick up for the council and the leader, and in on this one it's the same questions time and time again, the same comments. And they've been qualified by the CEO and by the leaders and by other officers. So I would suggest that You know, the repetitive nature of this is not good for this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. I've got Councillor Hannah online now. Councillor Hannah.
Hello. Thank you very much for your explanation, and Gareth for raising the bit about the ALN. I think a lot of people are not aware of the differences in that respect between English county councils and our own, and so that's really important that members and the public are aware that there are significant different pressures for our councils. We did have a proposal and a seconding of a 5% contingency charge, which I think was what Councillor Gareth was suggesting, so that we would set aside, sorry, 5 million for a contingency fund, I believe. Is that what he had then suggested? My question to that is that there's not been any suggestion as to how that would be funded. Now, that to me would equate to a 6.25% council tax rise if there wasn't any suggestion as to how that 5 million was to be, where it was to be found. And I would ask that if people are going to propose spending or sums of that sort of amount of being put towards something, that they actually qualify that with explaining where they would expect that funding to come from. Would that be a service cut, or would that be a 6.25 increase in council tax? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Did you not hear Councillor Gareth come back and amend his recommendation? He spent some time amending that.
I just heard the figures, and I heard then that Abdul had seconded, so I'm quite happy to be corrected if he had changed that.
Matt will explain. He amended his.
Yeah, there was some discussion about the ability to put a figure on it, and Councillor Gareth changed his proposal to a meaningful contingency. Was the note that I had. Yeah,
it's slightly alarming though, isn't it? Meaningful, but still not yet any suggestion as to where that meaningful amount would come from. So whether it's 5 million or a meaningful amount, I would encourage members to come up with funding suggestions as to where that's going to come from. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hannah. Are you able to hear okay online, members? Was there a problem with the sound? No, you're able to hear. Oh, that's good. Thank you. Councillor Gareth, then Councillor Abdul and Councillor David.
Well, for me, it's pretty obvious where it's going to come from. It's either going to have to come from budget, from within the budget, or it's going to have to come from council tax. But what's clear to me also is that we can't keep on taking money from the reserves. Otherwise, the reserves are just going to run out, and we're not in a position. So I think we need to budget for a contingency some way or other. Thank you.
Dear Councillor Gareth. Next is Councillor Abdul online, and then Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarity to Councillor Hannah, it does say meaningful, and we seem to find Welsh Government coming with the magic wand on last minute and increases budget slightly. So as and when they do, and if we set a budget, we're not going to say, oh, Welsh Government giving us so much, so let's reduce the amount we predicted. We need to plan it, and if the Welsh Government does increase the budget, then it can come from within that budget.
Dear Councillor Abdul.
And that's like that's we, as Councillor Gareth Jones said, we need to do something rather than just hoping and burying our head in the sand.
Thank you very much, Councillor Abdul. Councillor David, is it a new question?
Yes, indeed, Chair. And what I'd like to ask is that we have a real problem in this council with people having time off sick, and it's an increasing thing, mostly due to stress. This is the main reason that's been given. We've heard that from the personnel officer when she spoke to us. Really, what are we doing about that, really? You know, why are people so unhappy with Team Conway? People come and work for us and then they get stressed. So that's the question.
We discussed this. Sorry, Councillor David. We discussed this at the previous meetings when Fran presented her personnel report. So maybe if you
Well,
could
it's not
pop
been
your
asked in it's not
question
been asked in this committee, and the question I'm asking
yeah,
this committee
yes,
is
yes, it was.
that we're talking about a budget. We're talking about a budget. We're talking about we're losing an awful lot of money with people that are having time off because they're not happy or they're stressed. And these are the questions that do need to be asked in this committee, because obviously that's going to have a significant impact on the budget. If people are having time off, that's a cost to this authority. So I'm asking this question in this committee today. So
Okay, well, it's not on the agenda, Councillor David. So
because it does affect the budget, doesn't it? It does have an effect on the budget, and that's the way I was looking at it, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor David. Okay, everyone, that's the last of the speakers we've got now. We've had a proposal from Councillor Gareth, which has been seconded by Councillor Abdul. Matt, would you like to do the honours for us and read that?
Chair, it was a recommendation that a meaningful contingency figure be built into the budget.
And that was seconded by
Councillor Abdul.
Councillor Abdul. Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And before we go to the vote, just to thank Gareth and Hugh for their contributions this morning and all their work and fielding all those difficult questions. So thank you for that. Right, so we've had a proposal, we've had a second. Would members like to show in favour, please? So online we've got...
Madam Chair, I did put my hand up to ask a question, but you obviously decided...
Sorry, nobody saw you. But yeah, well, what's because we're just doing the vote, Councillor.
It was a question on where members suggested that the meaningful balances came
we've
from.
already moved to the vote, and I'm really sorry.
Well, I put my hand up, and you said everybody's entitled to ask a question.
I didn't see you, Councillor Chris didn't see you, and I didn't see you. So you know, maybe wave a bit more next time. There's 3 in the room and 4 online. Yes. Yeah, please, sorry about that interruption, people. Could we have a clear show online of the proposal? So in the room, we had 3 online. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 online. That's 7. Those against, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 against. Is that, are we definite on that?
Chair, you have the casting vote.
Yeah, are we definite on?
Chair, you
Councillor Abdul, you've got your
have the
hand up
casting
again.
vote, Chair. You have the casting vote. You
I
can
do
vote.
indeed. I do indeed. And I shall cast my vote to go with the recommendation. So that's passed. So thank you very much indeed, members. Thank you, officers. And look at that, 11:30. Ooh, sneak to 25 to 12. Very good. If we could stop the recording now, thank you. Diolch.